This
Pleasure to
conference
speak
will now
with
be
you.
recorded.
And just a friendly reminder, if you are attending, if you could please mute your microphones. I'm just getting some feedback, so that'd be really helpful. But yes, Marcy, thank you so much for having me today to speak with your team about the carbon accounting ability of the SGP Impact Tracker. I'm not going to lie, I feel a number of you who have been engaged with the SGP program for a while, as well as the SGP Impact Tracker, are going to say, wow, I wish I had realized did this ages ago. So my apologies for the delay, but as we've discussed, there's just been a lot more focus on carbon impacts, carbon footprinting, GHG accounting, whatever we want to call it. At the end of the day, it really is about understanding our footprint and our impacts on the environment. And carbon accounting, GHG emission accounting has become one of those key ways. So right now I have an agenda up where really I think it's my responsibility to discuss why it is important. Why should you be spending the next half hour of your time listening to me speak? Because I know that's a very valuable half hour. But then really jump into, what are GHGs and how can we help you with that process? So one key thing that I want to mention is that I'm going to go pretty fast through these slides, and for more background, for more details around all the stuff you see here, I would highly suggest you join the ESG Foundation series, because I've been doing this for over 10 years now, and I cannot believe the change in the industry around ESG sustainability in this past year. The time is now. If you were working on this 5 or 10 years ago, you had the luxury to figure this stuff out as you moved along, or maybe put it off. But more and more, the necessity for integrating sustainability into your organization from a systematic institutional standpoint is essential. And here I have a bunch of reasons why, and this will be available to review, but I'm not going to go through all of them because I have other stuff I want to talk to you about. But quite honestly, at the end of the day, for me, from a practical standpoint, it's about saving money, continuous improvement, and doing what's right for our environment, for our employees, and for our community. And what we're seeing is the marketplace is now even putting more pressure on businesses to go beyond because it's the right thing to do. More and more, ESG and sustainability is seen as a key piece around risk management. A great example is the S&P 500. They release a list of the top 10 ESG organizations, and Tesla used to be on it and was dropped this year. And as a result of that, they actually saw their stock price decrease by 6% because more and more investors are seeing this as a key piece of risk management. You can also see with what we're experiencing right now when it comes to energy and inflation. There are some things in your business you can control, and that is your sustainability program. That is how you use resources. One thing you cannot directly control is the cost of energy, and that is a huge piece of risk management. And from my background, from my standpoint, at the end of the day, the more lean you are, the more your team focuses on these issues and reducing consumption, the less risk you have when there are huge price increases like we're experiencing right now around energy, whether it's fuel, electricity, whatever it may be. The more efficient you are, the more protection you have from these sorts of inflation activities. Also, cities and states more and more are mandating disclosure. They are requiring companies, facilities to disclose energy performance. And this is part of our energy security, of our energy future, because more and more we're demanding electricity, and a big piece of electricity is supply and demand. And so utilities are always trying to figure out the demand on the infrastructure, on the network, and trying to avoid having to build more power plants, or trying to figure out how they can prevent brownouts or blackouts as we need more heating and cooling. And so if you see your location on this map, I highly recommend you look up the reporting requirements, the disclosure requirements for these cities and states, because they mandate, by law, they require your organization to report on energy consumption. And this is a key strategy they're using to understand performance as well as figure out how to reduce it. And they're also incentivizing companies to do it, because there are then programs to help you reduce. About 5 or 10 years ago, a very common metric that the EPA Energy Star program was mentioning is that if a company just starts benchmarking their performance and reviewing it from energy, water, waste, and recycling, automatically a level of awareness occurs just by that activity, and they can achieve just a 10 to 15% reduction in consumption just by paying attention to this. And that's why a lot of these locations are mandating by law companies disclose their energy performance. Each location is different, and if you see your city or state listed here, please let me know if you have questions about what that may look like, and we can make sure that you are in compliance with the benchmarking mandates, as well as helping you understand this information and put it to work for you. So I've been talking about energy benchmarking, energy security. What does this have to do with GHGs? So greenhouse gases are chemical compounds that have been linked to global warming because they have been scientifically proven to trap heat. One science experiment that was performed in 1856 really shined the light on how this works. And for me, my background's in chemical engineering, and I was having a hard time understanding how this can be proven. And Eunice Newton-Foote simply put 2 beakers in the sun with a thermometer in them, capped them. One just had regular air, one had CO2. She put them in the sun, took them out of the sun, and watched which beaker held a higher temperature compared to the other. And through her experiment, she recognized that regular air, when she just capped the top of the beaker, it actually reduced the temperature in that beaker faster than the one with CO2. So she scientifically proved that CO2 held heat, it trapped heat. And that really was the basis, the origin of understanding climate science and how these gases can impact our environment. So now you had that quick crash course on GHGs. How do we quantify it? What does this mean? I'm sure your team has already heard these terms, scope 1, 2, and 3. You've probably seen me put up this diagram before. Because at the end of the day, your organization's greenhouse gas emissions, your carbon footprint is all linked to consumption. It's about the activity that your facility does that emits some sort of GHG. And what has happened is the World Resource Institute, a very well-known international organization, has developed a standard, widely accepted protocol for calculating what your carbon footprint is. And so they have broken it up into 3 scopes. You have your scope 1, your scope 2, and your scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 is what's happening at your facility in terms of the fuel you purchase and the fuel you burn in your facility. So propane on your fork trucks or natural gas in your hot water boilers. This, as you would imagine, is directly at your location, very easy to capture. You're looking at your natural gas invoice or your fuel purchase invoice from your fuel card. Then we have our scope 2, which is indirect. This is the electricity or district steam or cooling water that you may purchase from a centralized plant. And these GHGs are a result of generating that fuel source. So the electricity that you consume or any other third-party generated energy sources. Electricity is the most common. So that's your scope 2. Then we have your scope 3, which, as you see from this infographic, has a lot to it, because this is everything else that's related to upstream and downstream of your facility and what is required for your business to operate. Your employees have to get to work if they're not 100% remote. That means they have to drive their car. Driving that car creates greenhouse gases. You have to understand particularly your supply chain, the infamous supply chain. And this is how you can understand the impacts of your materials that you receive before you sell them to your client. And as you see, there's a number of other potential emission factors that go into the scope 3, including waste and recycling and business travel. And so some of these are quite, for printers in particular, when it comes to scope 3, they do not directly apply, like business investment or franchises, but there are definitely some key items, and I will get into this actually in our ESG Foundation series around scope 3, because it really is about, well, which impacts are big, which impacts matter. You know, we're not looking to get, you know, just 1% of your GHGs, but what effort can we put in to get a majority of our GHGs or our greenhouse gases? And so to capture what your actual footprint is, now that we know it's linked to consumption, how can we actually calculate this? Because you get an energy bill, it says the CCF of natural gas. It says the kilowatt hours of electricity. So what the EPA has done is reviewed the GHG protocol, which is the World Resource GHG methodology, also known as the GHG protocol, to understand how businesses can capture this, calculate their footprint, and now has worked extremely hard to help businesses and organizations understand the emissions related to their activity. For example, what you see right here is the research that eGrid has done to understand the different utilities throughout the US and how they generate electricity. By using the generation mix for each of these utility regions, they calculate the GHG factor or GHG coefficient, the GHG emission linked to each kilowatt hour. And so they actually publish this. You can easily Google GHG emissions, eGrid, EPA, and it will give you a whole list of what those factors actually are. So you know that for every kilowatt hour you consume, that is equivalent to X amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And so as you would imagine, utilities that have a lot of purple, blue, green here, the red, those are all renewable sources, so they have a lower GHG coefficient. Those who have a lot of gray, like in the Midwest, have a very high GHG coefficient because burning coal has a lot more carbon released into the atmosphere than a renewable resource. And so when we calculate your GHGs linked to electricity, we actually already consider the renewable energy included in the generation mix for your utilities. And I know this sounds very complex, and if you would like to learn more, we'll address that a little bit more in the ESG series, because we have this broken down actually into its own subject, because it is quite complex. So as we get all of this different information, how do we actually understand and measure our greenhouse gases? What is a metric ton of GHGs? What? So what scientists have done is also measured the ability of these different gases to trap heat. So carbon, since it's the most prevalent greenhouse gas emission, it actually makes up about 80% of the greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere, has been assigned the global warming potential of 1. And this is the baseline for understanding its ability to capture and hold heat. From there, using that amount of time of its ability to capture heat. They have studied other types of greenhouse gases, including methane, nitrous oxide, and hydrofluorocarbons. All of these have different abilities to capture heat. The reason why we call it our carbon footprint, again, is because carbon dioxide contributes to 80% of the GHGs in our atmosphere. So it really is mainly made up of carbon, but as you see, there are others. These other gases also have very high ability to capture and hold heat. And so what we do when we capture your greenhouse gas emissions is we use CO2 as the baseline, as the base unit, and then we calculate what's called a CO2 equivalent. And that converts all of these different types of GHGs into one unified GHG. So if we have methane, a CO2 value or a GHG value for methane, we actually multiply that by 25 to turn it into a carbon equivalent, because methane, CH4, has 25 times the ability to capture heat. So long story short, this stuff is kind of complicated. It requires a lot of math, and it's helpful to kind of know how it happens. So when you're talking about this stuff with your team to try and understand, it's useful. But at the end of the day, it really is about what's meaningful here. You know, at my location, what can I do? And then how does SGP and the impact tracker help me do this very complicated thing? So the first thing is to understand the key areas of impact. That is, of course, your consumption on site. Scope 1 and Scope 2, best place to start. So usually it's natural gas. Sometimes it can be propane. And then, of course, the fuel consumed by your vehicles and your electricity. Right now, your SGP impact tracker sustainability metrics captures all of that consumption data for you. Then you enter it into the dashboard, into the impact tracker. And the key thing is that seamlessly in the SGP impact tracker, we have included those GHG coefficients so that as you enter your consumption, you can now see your carbon footprint. You can calculate your carbon footprint. So, without further ado, with all that background information, I am now jumping into the impact tracker, because yes, this is very complicated, and yes, we have now made it very simple for you. As a friendly reminder, you can log into your SGP impact tracker from the SGP partnership page. I have to emphasize, the reason why you may not have seen some of our newest updates is because you have not cleared your cache. A shortcut key is Control-Shift-Delete. I hope this doesn't make my computer crash. We'll see if I can do it. If you are on a PC, let's see. Hooray. So this is how you clear your cache. Make sure to clear data from all time. I would not recommend checking your passwords, but I would recommend doing advanced, date range, all time, and to make sure to include browsing history, cookies, and cached items. If you do not do this, you will not see some of our newest updates. Then you say clear data, and you will have a clear cache. Please make sure you do not delete your passwords. Then you'll be very upset. So once you do that, you log into your impact tracker. This should look fairly familiar to you. In this facility, I have 2 facilities. So some of you do have more than one location captured. And as I mentioned, we seamlessly have the GHGs included here. So one key thing you can see under our unit measure is if there is a GHG assigned to a certain category, we have what's called GHG in MT, and the MT stands for metric tons. And so now I can actually go and look at my facility to see what my metric tons of GHGs are. So now I actually have a number, an actual value to say, you know, what is my carbon footprint? This looks like we are having some bandwidth issues because it is working kind of slow. So here I'm just changing my date range so I can give you my greenhouse gas emissions for 2021. Now, the impact tracker is only as good as the data that has been uploaded in your sustainability metrics. At this time, the sustainability metrics captures your full scope 1 emissions, your scope 2 emissions, and a partial scope 3. And that is because we capture waste and recycling. And so for each of those items, we can actually see the GHGs and your consumption data. So here I have 2 locations, and I can say for More Printing Co., my carbon footprint for 2021 was 34 metric tons of carbon. This is definitely a fictitious dashboard. Most times your footprint is in the thousands, 2,000 to 3,000. Next, you can actually go into your different GHGs to see what is the overall impact of that. And so as I get more historical data, I can see the footprint of the other locations, including pressing sustainably. And now we also have, under energy, we can see our GHGs by location to see, what makes up my total footprint. But as you see, it's linked directly to my consumption data. And I can see my trends and how it's looking over time. Now, this is helpful, but most times when your team is talking about GHGs, it is linked to scope 1, 2, and 3. So this view is helpful because you're able to see, what are my main contributors to GHGs? If I want to reduce my footprint, where should I focus my energy? And this view is very helpful for that. But if you have a client who's asking you for their scope 3 emissions, it's not as easily summarized as you would prefer probably for the GHG protocol. So one thing we have added is a new tab up here, which is called Carbon Accounting. And if you click on this, it now actually summarizes the data based on your different GHG emissions by scope. Now this one, this example does not have very many different types of GHGs. That's why it's all purple. So I'm actually going to pull up a different carbon accounting here, so you can see how it may look for other locations. And Marcy would like to stress for anybody to please enter questions into the chat feature, because we have about 4 more minutes before we're going to get into questions. So oftentimes you do have clients who ask you what their scope 3 emissions are, and you can use this as your source for providing that data, as well as for helping your team understand your performance based on scope 1, 2, or 3. And oftentimes, if you are required to report in some format for a client through the CDP, through science-based targets, through other third-party reporting organizations, this format is the most widely accepted and recognized throughout this carbon reporting industry. So one other key thing I'd like to mention is that not only do we have this new carbon accounting tab to talk about your GHGs, this is password protected. If you wanted to share with a client, at this point in time, you would need to screenshot it and send it as a JPEG and or download the information, which you can through through the report. But as you may all recall, we also have what's called our engagement display. Now, to launch that, you would need to access a specific facility. And similar to this tab up here, you would launch it through your GHG, through your engagement display right here. Then, after you put in your dates, you have this information. There is the option to make this so it is not password protected. You do have to go in and enable the public access display. But what this does is essentially serve as a live sustainability report. So your team can report on carbon as well as your other key performance indicator when it comes to sustainability performance and the requirements of your SGP certified facility. So to quantify this, we do have a CO2 tab which quantifies your performance, as well as shows the trend from your baseline year, if you so choose, to your most current year. And if you've reduced your footprint in any way, it talks about that in what we call people units. So this is a great way to share with your clients, particularly if they are interested in their carbon footprint, because your footprint is part of their footprint, but also as a way to help your team understand and talk about these issues, because I feel like that's one of the reasons why people have such a hard time understanding what we mean by carbon footprint, because really it's not specifically the carbon footprint that we're thinking about. It's really the fuel that we're consuming at our location. So I feel like there's a bit of disconnect when it comes to understanding, what is it and how do we capture it? And so the engagement display, if you are an SGP certified facility and have access to the impact tracker, which you need to if you are SGP certified, you have access to everything you have seen here today. Also, let's just see what else I have. Oh yeah, I'm jumping into next steps. So before I do that, Marcy, do you have any questions?
Right now, we're really looking at there's a lot of interest in how do we report, and I believe you covered this quite well, report the carbon emissions to clients. And I think that when you really do see what the tracker has been able to do in the past, and really I think it's more of an education, I know at least from my point of view, so that everyone understands that greenhouse gas emissions really are your carbon footprint. Is that a good or an accurate statement?
Yes, that is a very accurate statement. So just like you have a shoe size, right? I have a size 6 footprint. Like when I put on a pair of shoes, when I go to the store to buy my shoes, I look for size 6. For this organization, for this facility that we're looking at, the size of their footprint is 11,158 metric tons of GHGs. And so that is the size, the actual size. And for me, it's kind of a relief, right? Instead of just not knowing, to have a number to put behind what all this stuff means. So now if you are working to reduce it, you now know where you are. It's like if you're trying to lose weight, you're now stepping on the scale and seeing how much you weigh. It's a benchmark, it's a baseline, it's where you start. And from there, you can now work out your regime to reduce it, or to make a pledge to reduce your footprint.
Right. And I think that when you do make a pledge to reduce your footprint, it's important to have this data there because you need to be able, as we say all the time, good data in is important so that you can verify and truly show that you have reduced your footprint. So, do you have any strategies that you could suggest for those, especially those certified facilities that are looking for their next continuous improvement project, as to how they could go about to look at possibly reducing their carbon footprint?
That is a very big subject, Marcy. And in our ESG Foundation series, we have, I should say, at least one, if not 2 sessions dedicated just to that. But at the end of the day, the first thing, the most foundational, important, meaningful thing that has actual impact, that will actually make a difference, is reducing. You have to reduce consumption. You have to make every single kilowatt hour count. You have to make every CCF of natural gas count. You have to use resources as efficiently as possible. And once you've done that, then there are other options. And I say that first and foremost because that's where we really address this climate issue. And also, it's where we're able to save money. For me, when I think about the sustainability, yes, environmental impacts are there, but also it's about saving money. It's about making my business more profitable. For every dollar I don't have to send to that utility company, I get to keep. That goes directly to my bottom line. And so this idea of reducing footprint actually gives you a different lens in these improvement projects that your team has been considering. Because now not only do you have an ROI from a dollar savings, but also from an environmental GHG standpoint. So first I would look at reducing, and then I would look at, particularly from electricity, renewable energies. But there are some serious considerations there. It can be very complicated. And like I said, at the end of the day, the first thing I encourage you to do is measure, set goals, and then reduce.
So speaking of measure, there's quite a few questions specifically on measure. So I'm going to read this. So I'm hoping that it'll come across. Instead of a straight line tracking of greenhouse gas emissions, is there a numerator such as parts, pounds, items produced to be able to better compare?
Yeah, that is a great question, because especially from a manufacturing standpoint, your emissions can always be increasing because you're increasing production. We're working with a printer right now who's installing their third printing press this year. So of course their electricity consumption is going up. So there is the ability within the SGP impact tracker to normalize by number of impressions, by million square inches. Whatever that value is that your team uses to understand performance, you can normalize by that to see how your efficiency has changed over time. From an operations standpoint, that's helpful, it's valuable, but at the end of the day, when you are reporting on this, people want to know the bottom line. They want to know the actual footprint. They don't want to know my footprint per my BMI, right? Those values to them really don't mean much. They want to know your actual footprint. So it is a helpful value, and the impact tracker can help you with that calculation and with seeing that consumption in the data display. I'll show you that right here. Especially from an operations standpoint. Right here we have our facility attribute, and that's where you can enter million square inches or number of impressions. And where I say you can enter, you can also include that in your sustainability metrics file. And we will add that for your team. So you're able to understand your performance per material you produce, but you still also seamlessly have your carbon footprint. And I think both of them have meaningful value.
And so when you talk about reporting your carbon footprint from the client's point of view, they want that actual number. They're not so much interested in per widget produced, but the actual number. So we do have a question. This I find interesting. Is there a baseline for greenhouse gas emissions?
So there is, like, for understanding your electricity, you know, there is a US average, I guess, for GHGs per, for GHG, you know, the GHG coefficient average for the US compared to different utilities. But in terms of an actual GHG baseline, I would recommend using the impact tracker to understand the SGP average and then compare it to yourself. And you may be way above the average, you may be way below the average, but the key is to see how your consumption or your GHGs have changed over time in comparison to the average. Is your performance improving in comparison? Is it diverging? That comparison allows you to quickly gauge if your company, if your business is keeping up with the industry. And I think that's extremely valuable. Next, you really want to establish the baseline on your performance, because that's what it's about. It's measuring where you are and then figuring out how to improve. And so if you have data, you know, from 2020, then that will become your GHG baseline. And from that point forward, you measure based on that baseline to see how you've improved. So you establish your own baseline essentially.
Okay. So essentially, and I know you and I have had this discussion as well as the SGP Technical Committee. Electricity factors for Canada.
Yeah, we
Are
have them.
there, pardon me?
We have them. They're in there.
Okay, so the question is, are there different tabs for each country? And then what you're saying is that the electricity factors that you referenced from the US EPA, you also have them in there specifically for Canada.
Precisely. Yep.
Okay,
And since it's Canada, they use a different framework. They do not use eGrid, but the EPA does have published GHG coefficients. That's part of Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and those are the coefficients that we're using.
for Canada.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. So we do have some there. All right, are there any other questions coming in? It doesn't look like it. Last call for questions. I would encourage you all to take a look at our webinar series that is coming up and starts next week. This was just a small taste of what will be covered. Katrina will be going into
Truly.
great more, there you go. Katrina will be going into a lot more detail about what the whole concept of environmental social governance, as well as taking a look at how you can reduce and what are some possibilities moving forward to reducing. It's important because as you know, your clients are starting to ask more and more questions about specifically your carbon footprint, and you really cannot make a pledge or you cannot make a goal unless you have actually calculated your footprint and you know where you are before you can reduce. So, any other questions?
I did see one, Marcy. Somebody asked about clearing their cache again.
Oh, yes, I'm
Um,
sorry. Yes.
usually, so if you are on a PC and you're in your browser, the shortcut key that usually works is Control, Shift, and Delete. You have to press all three of them at the same time. Control, Shift, Delete. If that doesn't appear to work, then you have to get into your settings and clear it from there. So now I'm in my Chrome settings and I go into privacy and can delete my cache, clear my cache from there as well. But it's very important to do that, or else you will not see the new carbon accounting tab in the impact tracker. This tab just will not appear at all.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So with that, there's no further questions, and I would encourage you all to clear your cache and take a look at the new carbon accounting tab within the SGP Impact Tracker. I would encourage you to go ahead and sign up for the ESG Foundation series. This was raised as an issue when we held our SGP Sustainability Summit in Boston, where there was quite a bit of interest and curiosity concerning not only ESG, but also looking at the concept of the carbon footprint and really beginning to understand what exactly your carbon footprint is and what you're looking at. Because as you start to look at calculating your carbon footprint, as Katrina has mentioned, you really do need to make sure that your data is sound and that you are putting in good data. And then if you have any questions about the SGP Impact Tracker and how it's used as your sustainability dashboard, I encourage you to contact Katrina with questions, or even Isaac, who reaches out to everyone to onboard you when you are looking to start up with your Impact Tracker. So with that, I thank you, Katrina. It's been a great program, and I look forward to it as we move on. So Katrina will send me her deck, and I will go ahead and send that out to everyone who participated today. Thank you so much, and if you have any questions, please reach out to Katrina or to the SGP program office. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, SGP community. Bye-bye.
Bye.